Welcome back to New Day Northwest. Cigarette smoking is the #1 risk factor for lung cancer. But lung cancer rates for never smokers are rising, especially among Asian women. Dr. Sid Devarakonda from the Swedish Cancer Institute joins me now to talk about why this is happening and what's being done about it. First of all, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Secondly, where do we stand with lung cancer right now?
So this is an important thing to be talking about. Of all cancers, lung cancer still claims the most number of lives globally and in the United States.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, every year in the United States, about 160,000 people still die from lung cancer. And we are much better off than where we were 10 years back, but we are still nowhere we want to be.
Okay.
That's the bottom line. So a few years back, the challenge with lung cancer is that about 2/3 of patients, when they're diagnosed, are diagnosed with incurable disease. A decade ago, or maybe 2 decades back, we did not have a lot of treatment options for these patients.
Right.
But now we have gotten very sophisticated. A good percentage of patients now can live for several years with the treatment advances that we have. Especially now we are much more nuanced in mapping out the genetic changes inside a cancer and designing the treatment that can kind of exploit those genetic changes. We know how to harness the immune system better so that we can keep the cancer under control.
Oh my gosh.
But still not everyone responds to these treatments. Those long-term survivors are not everyone, and that's where we want to be going forward.
Okay, and that's going to take more research, right?
Exactly, and that's where the industry, physicians, scientists, that's where all the effort is going.
Okay, all right. I have so many follow-up questions about all of that, but I want to stick to it right here because, you know, you are doing the important research surrounding lung cancer, particularly among never smokers, people who have never smoked before. What are you learning with that? Because, you know, we saw, you know, Katie Couric's husband die, who had never smoked. He died of lung cancer. People, how does this happen? What have you learned?
So smoking has been conventionally viewed as the sole risk factor for lung cancer, and then lung cancer has been viewed as a smoker's disease, leading to a lot of stigma surrounding it, which is not necessary. But it turns out that about 10% of people who have never touched a cigarette their entire life can still get lung cancer, or 10% of lung cancer patients have never touched a cigarette their entire life. Why they get it, we still don't know. There's been a lot of research that has gone into this, and I think collectively where we are today is that never smoker lung cancer is probably not just one disease. There are some studies pointing out that this could be exposure to radon that increases the risk. It could be exposure to air pollution that I think is now a universal bane that we are all subject to. Or it could be exposure to cooking fumes. We just don't know.
Okay.
The one thing quite characteristic about never smoker lung cancer, though, is that for some reason it tends to disproportionately affect women more than men. And then it's also a lot more common amongst those of Asian descent. And we, once again, have a lot of questions, but we don't have good answers for why that's the case. And that's where a lot of our own research and my own research is going.
So these answers are hidden in the genetic code, hidden in the immunology of the patient, right?
The genetic code, yes, that could give you clues as to what's going on. For instance, if you look at the DNA that is extracted from a lung cancer, you can almost see the telltale signs of cigarette smoke or chemical-induced damage that comes from cigarette smoke.
Right.
So some of our research, and my own research in the past, has focused on looking at the DNA from never smoker lung cancer and trying to see what signatures does it have. Does it have any clues buried in there as to what may have led to that cancer? So far, such research has given us some clues, but nothing definitive.
Because when we do these things to ourselves that aren't healthy, it literally damages the DNA, and you can see the changes physically. And so finding the difference between the never smokers and everyone else who's done this is important. Let's talk about the risk factors for everyone. Obviously, we know smoking is a huge part of it, but you mentioned a few other things I hadn't heard of. Cooking fumes, for example.
Once again, how strong of a risk factor these are is still unknown. These all come from studies that have looked at different risk exposures, and then, you know, but then you have to keep in mind that it's difficult to quantify risk when it comes to some of these risk factors that you're exposed to in daily life, like for instance, air pollution, cooking fumes. We're all exposed to them at some level. But then I think the far greater question to also ask is that, is it just a question of exposure, or is it also a component of our own genetics that increases our risk of developing these cancers with such exposures? I think the next 5 years we'll learn a lot more about that.
You know, I made a mistake, and I mentioned that Katie Couric's husband died of lung cancer. I believe it was colon cancer. But the one thing this does make me realize is that certain cancers are so tied. So I know that oftentimes when someone gets lung cancer, it can very easily pass to the brain. Isn't that right?
Correct. Of all cancers, lung cancer is one of the most common ones to go to the brain. And this is something that we have looked at, and we don't have a good explanation as to why that happens. But some of the data we have now suggests that cancer cells are so capable of reprogramming themselves.
Yeah.
So it's almost like when they're in Rome, they have to act as a Roman. They can almost program their pathways in such a way that they can survive in the brain a lot easier.
So we're about out of time. I had so many questions. This is such a great conversation. I want to continue, but I have to ask, is it ever too late to stop smoking? I mean, is it ever like a lost cause for someone if they've, let's say, smoked for 50 years?
There's no such thing as a lost cause. You can always quit smoking. Of course, it's better if you never pick one up. Prevention is better than cure.
Yes.
But then you can always quit smoking, and I think that's the best gift that you can give yourself in terms of health.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about this and for sharing all the things that you're doing at Swedish right now to help continue the research on this. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, to learn more about lung cancer care and treatment at the Swedish Cancer Institute, you can go to the website you see on your screen and make an appointment to see one of the SCI experts. They also have extensive information on screening there as well. So go check it out because you need to find out if you need to be screened as well.